Mike Johnson sent a remarkably clear signal this morning that he thinks Donald Trump is becoming politically indefensible. Trump is making it harder by the day for Republicans to protect him, and Johnson, who is already anxious about the stability of his majority, knows it. What makes this moment unusual is that Johnson rarely criticizes Trump publicly, yet his frustration slipped through when he was pressed about one of Trump's latest proposals. The tension between the two men has been building for weeks, largely because Trump keeps announcing policies that either don't exist in law or contradict Republican messaging, forcing Johnson to improvise damage control in real time. The latest example was Trump's bizarre claim about credit cards and a law that does not exist, a statement so off-base that Johnson had to distance himself while pretending not to. It was one of the most open acknowledgments yet that Trump is hurting his own party and that even his most loyal allies are running out of defenses or patience.
With no help from the Fed, because we have a total stiff at the Fed.
Do you have any, can I ask you, the announcement on the cap on credit card interest rates
Yeah.
that came out on Friday, what happens if the credit card companies don't comply by the January date?
Well, then they're in violation of the law.
And you have congressional
Very
support?
severe things. No, I want a cap on credit card interest rates because, you know, some of them are 28, almost 30%. And that, the people don't know they're paying 30%. The people out there, you know, they're working, they have no idea that they're paying 30%. No way. We're putting a one-year cap at 10%, and that's it. They know it. They've really abused the public. The credit card companies have totally abused it. I'm not going to let it happen.
Is that something really?
When pressed about his announcement to cap credit card interest rates, Trump responded as if the policy were already federal law. He claimed that if credit card companies failed to comply by January, they would be in violation of the law and face very severe consequences. He cited rates as high as 28 to 30% and argued that ordinary consumers had no idea they were paying them. Trump then declared that a one-year cap at 10% would be imposed, accusing credit card companies of abusing the public. The issue is that no such law exists and no federal authority has enacted or authorized the cap. Trump spoke as though the measure were already on the books, leaving Republicans to either correct him, defend the fiction, or silently hope the comment disappears. The result underscores the broader dynamic between Trump and the GOP. He announces policies that do not exist, and his party is left to pretend they do.
Trump gave me a call.
And what did you guys talk about?
Well, we talked about, remember, Donald Trump had raised this question early on about putting a cap on credit card interest rates. And I had said at the time when he announced this a year ago, I had said, great. I had been proposing that for years. Let's do it. And what's Donald Trump done since then? Nothing. And while I had a chance to talk to him, I raised the question of how we reduce housing costs. We've got a bill that has passed the Senate unanimously to expand the supply of housing, but Republicans over in the House have hung it up. And Donald Trump has not lifted a finger to get that bill passed on through. Look, what I talked about this morning is the importance of Democrats fighting to lower costs. And for me, that's what this is all about. That's what the conversation was all about, how to get costs down for American families.
Critics argued that Trump has no genuine intention of capping credit card interest rates because he has always been aligned with Wall Street, tech billionaires, and the oil lobby, groups he once asked for $1 billion contribution in exchange for favorable treatment. If Trump actually cared about consumer protection, the financial sector would not have been deregulated so aggressively during his presidency, and agencies like the CFPB would not have been weakened. Protections against junk fees, flight cancellations, and predatory lending would still be in place. Instead, Trump has shown consistent disinterest in restraining banks or major corporations, which makes his sudden populist posture highly improbable. Elizabeth Warren made a similar point. She noted that when Trump first floated the idea of capping credit card interest a year ago, she publicly supported it because she had been advocating for that policy for years. But after the announcement, Trump did nothing to advance it. No legislation, no pressure on Republicans, no follow-through. Warren also raised the issue of housing costs, pointing out that a bipartisan Senate bill to expand supply passed unanimously, but has since been stalled by House Republicans, with Trump again refusing to engage. For Warren, the contrast is simple. Democrats are pushing concrete measures to lower costs for working families, while Trump speaks in slogans with no policy behind them.
Trump is proposing a 10% cap on credit card interest rates as a part of an affordability push. How much support is in your caucus for that?
I talked with him about it briefly yesterday, and he is the president is the ideas guy, and what he's doggedly determined to do and laser focused upon doing is the same thing that we are, and that is reducing the cost of living, bringing down prices for the American people, and he's looking at every idea under the sun to do that. It's one of a large menu of ideas that have been proposed as something we ought to think about and investigate. Since I had the conversation with him, I've talked to a number of colleagues about that and what that would mean, and are there unintended consequences of that? And it's a complicated area. So I don't know. Like everything else, you would need legislation to do something like that, and we'd have a lot of work to build consensus around it. But you got to be very careful if you go forward in that. In our zeal to bring down costs, you don't want to have negative secondary effects of that. So, for example, one of the things that the president probably had not thought through, and others at first glance, it sounds great. We should bring down interest rates to 10%. It would help everybody, all borrowers. There's a lot of Americans who have a lot of credit card debt. But then, what some of the experts have said is, well, but the problem is if you do that, then the credit card companies, the negative secondary effect is that they would just stop lending money, and maybe they cap what people are able to borrow at a very low amount, and then that would have a negative effect on a lot of people who work on revolving credit. So
when pressed on Trump's idea of capping credit card interest at 10%, Speaker Mike Johnson immediately shifted into caution. He called Trump an ideas guy and framed the proposal as just one suggestion among many for lowering living costs. Without endorsing it, Johnson noted that such a cap would require legislation and substantial consensus, hinting at the lack of GOP support. He then quietly undercut Trump's proposal by emphasizing the complexity of credit markets and warning about unintended consequences. According to Johnson, experts believe that if interest rates were capped at 10%, credit card companies might respond by cutting off lending or severely limiting how much consumers can borrow, harming the very people Trump claims to help. The subtext was unmistakable. The policy sounds good politically, but Trump has not thought through the economics, and Republicans are not eager to carry it.
I don't think anybody is considering that. I mean, it's not been in any briefing I've been in, and I go to all of them. Okay, it's not. This is not a. I think this is a media narrative that's been created. I do. We've been very clear. I mean,
When asked about the scenario, Speaker Mike Johnson flatly denied that it was being considered. He said it had not been mentioned in any briefing he attended, and that he attends all of them, implying that the story was being driven by the press rather than policymakers. Johnson framed the situation as a manufactured media narrative and insisted that House leadership had already been clear about their position. The subtext was simple. Whatever reporters were speculating about was not an active discussion inside the Republican caucus.
Washington, D.C., and talk about sending troops into the ground or into combat. He's not talking about his kids. He's not talking about all of his minions' kids. He's talking about kids like me and the people that I grew up in working class areas, rural places around the country that have to pick up rifles, jump into tanks or helicopters and do the thing.
He argued that when political elites like Donald Trump beat the drums of war in Washington, they do so with a level of detachment that is only possible for people whose families will never be asked to bear the actual burden of those decisions. When Trump talks about sending troops into combat, he is not referring to his own children or the children of wealthy donors, CEOs, consultants, and operatives who surround him. Those families remain insulated from the physical risks of military service. They participate in war as theater, arguing strategy on cable news, drafting op-eds, and trading geopolitical abstractions across conference tables, but never as combatants. The people who fight are the ones from working-class America, young men and women from rural counties, the industrialized towns, and blue-collar communities who enlist because it offers structure, a paycheck, or a path out. They are the ones who pick up rifles, sit inside armored vehicles, and fly helicopters into danger zones. They carry the consequences of decisions made by elites who will never see a battlefield and whose children are protected from the fallout by wealth, education, and connections. The wars that elites posture about are ultimately executed by people from social classes that rarely have representation in Congress, virtually never have representation in the foreign policy establishment, and are mostly absent from the donor networks that shape American policymaking. This is the fundamental disconnect. War is debated by elites but fought by the working class. And when Trump and others speak casually about escalating conflicts or intervening abroad, they do so with a confidence that only comes from knowing that someone else's children will absorb the cost. It is a reminder that the power to wage war and the responsibility to fight it reside in two different Americas, one that decides and one that serves.